Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. I was given this DIY build your own camera kit as a present for Christmas. So I thought now was as good a time as any to have a better look at it, talk you through what's inside the box, construct it, run through a kind of a test roll, and then if I'm satisfied that it's kind of working correctly and there's a chance that I might actually be able to take some images with it, give it a go with some real kind of film. Yeah, so I was going to start this video sooner than I had done, because when I got the camera I saw, oh great, it's a twin lens reflex camera, and obviously I've already got one of these which takes 120 films, so I assumed straight off the bat that I would need some more 120 films. So I bought a couple rolls in anticipation, and then when I actually took the time to look at the rear of the box, I saw that it actually uses 35mm film. So so thankfully I still had a roll of HP5 Plus in the cupboard, so I can use that instead and use the 120 film in my Yashica at a later date. So when I've done some research of what these kind of kits are like, it's a little bit kind of hit and miss in terms of the quality, and I'll be really interested to see what the construction is going to be like in terms of whether I can see any obvious areas the light is going to enter the camera and cause kind of light leaks like those associated with kind of Holga and other kind of toy cameras. So yeah, so I think that's about as much as I want to say. Let's open it up and I'll kind of get a sense of how long it's going to take to construct and how easy it will be. Another thing as well is some of the kits out there, they don't seem to have any kind of instructions or the tools to construct it, but this one does actually say it includes all that, so hopefully that should make my life a little bit easier. Rightio. Oh, quite a nice big guide actually. Nice component reference sheet. And then a nice, yeah, quite well laid out actually. And yeah, and I can see the tool in the bottom right hand kind of compartment there to put this together with. Not what you would call frustration-free packaging. Yeah, so quite a nice compact set actually. I won't tip it up now because it will all fall out, but it's all got a good space, you know, and then this kind of component quick reference sheet should kind of help me assemble. Let's have a quick look at the assembly instructions. Yeah, I suspect it'll probably take me, it doesn't actually have a time on it for how long it reckons it would take, but there's 76 steps in the instructions and they look pretty clear, to be honest, so hopefully it should go quite smoothly, the construction. And then I can talk through when it's constructed on how to use it. It's got some instructions here which will be quite handy. And it does actually say here that it takes ISO 200 or ISO 400 35mm film. I think what's more critical is that it only takes a maximum of 24 exposures. So I'm guessing even if you put in a 36 exposure roll of film, you will only still be able to get 24, which is a little bit disappointing, but thankfully my test roll today does only have 24 exposures, so at least that will kind of not waste any film, because film's getting pretty expensive these days, so not to be able to use the full kind of roll is quite a limitation. And I can't see anywhere in the instructions what kind of speed or aperture it shoots at, because obviously you want to kind of get an idea of whether you can shoot in kind of lower light, for instance, but I don't think you can with this camera. I think it's going to be a bit like the Holga. You're only really going to be able to shoot in really kind of decent light, because I think from what I've read, it has a shutter speed of 1/125th of a second and an aperture of about f8, f11, which is broadly kind of similar to what the kind of the Holga camera kind of affords its user. So anyway, with all that out of the way, I think the next thing to do is to construct the camera, starting with this piece here, number 1, and I'll put the time lapse of the build up now. Let's hope it goes smoothly. Right, so as you can see, I have successfully managed to finish constructing the classic camera from 8, which is also, from what I've been Googling around, seems to be kind of like the Haynes classic camera set that you can build. So I suspect it's the same kind of set, just rebranded multiple times. But yeah, it was quite, as you could probably see from that time lapse, it was quite fiddly, and looking at it now, it is quite a neat little kind of toy. You know, obviously when I compare it to the Holga, it feels kind of a lot more, it feels almost a bit more weighty compared to the Holga, which weighs next to nothing, and it just feels, I don't know, it just feels a little bit better quality in some regards, and we'll talk about those in a minute. Obviously it's a little bit more discreet than my particular Holga here, but it was only cheap. So let me just highlight some areas I did have particular troubles. The main one that I got to first was the shutter mechanism. So I'll press it now, you can probably see it. But when I did it originally, it wasn't firing until I kind of released the lever here, whereas now it does actually release when I'm pressing down on the shutter. And I found a really helpful video actually, and I'll put it in the description, and it basically kind of slowed down the mechanism so you can kind of understand what was happening, and then in order for you to kind of then look at the different screws and that you could adjust to see what it should be looking like and feeling like for it to be firing correctly. And I'm pleased to say that that seems to be working correctly now. So moving on from that particular aspect of the build, the springs were very fiddly. The next problem I faced as well, and I think this was a problem with the instructions in my opinion, but it was basically showing that you were to slide in the plate with the mirror on when both of the sides of the camera were in place, and I just found that to be physically impossible. So I had to kind of take off one of the sides in order to slide the mirror plate back in and then reattach the side, and then that made it a bit fiddly with some of the screws because there wasn't like a space really with that plate in to tighten them down, but I managed, and it fit a lot easier after I took the side off. This thing up at the top here as well, the viewfinder, is also very fiddly, and you've almost got to kind of like construct it every time you want to use it. So whoop, and then it's just broken off as well. So that's off to a good start. There you go, clip back in again. So yeah, so that kind of like flips out like that, stays in place, and then yeah, so that was another fiddly part to do, and as you can see, it's quite temperamental whether it kind of stays on or not. The final one of these was quite difficult as well, I found, to basically get the glass or the plastic lens in place correctly aligned, so you could then push in this kind of cone of plastic into place. And then it was quite clever that these basically, this is your focus here, you kind of, they're kind of linked, so when you're looking through the viewfinder, you're seeing the viewing lens, it's obviously connected to the taking lens as well. Right, so on to my biggest problem I had with the camera is that basically I've already run a test roll through it, and I'll run it through again in a minute as well, just to demonstrate how the camera works. But basically there's a counter on the side here which is linked to inside the camera, is linked to like a little tiny sprocket there, and the idea is that the film goes over that sprocket, so that when you then wind on the film to the next exposure, that sprocket will turn, so that you know once it's done kind of one complete revolution that that film is ready for the next exposure. But I just cannot get it to turn correctly. I've tried to get the film to lay as flat as I could across the back, and it just doesn't seem to work. The sprocket just doesn't seem to protrude enough out of its kind of casing to kind of correctly hook onto the film. So I've decided not to bother relying on that. What I did do is I kind of made a mark on the film and then wound it on, and then thankfully for it to travel from the bottom of kind of the casing to the top was one complete revolution of the actual wind on dial. So what I've done is I've actually added a couple marks with Tipp-Ex, so that when I'm out in the field I know that I just need to basically turn it one kind of revolution and then it's ready for the kind of the next exposure. It does seem a little bit kind of strange why they didn't kind of couple the counter to the actual wind on film. I think that would have been much better from a design point of view, or even just a better kind of sprocket. I think maybe if people are relying on that kind of counter and it doesn't always wind on correctly, then that might be a reason why people have difficulty with this camera. And also as well, if the shutter mechanism wasn't kind of tweaked correctly, then that might also be a reason why some images don't turn out as expected. And I've also looked at it as well, and you're supposed to be able to focus between 50 centimeters and infinity, and I've twizzled these dials quite a lot now whilst looking down into the viewfinder, and I just can't see any change in the kind of the picture that I'm looking at. So I really think focus is going to be a bit hit or miss out in the field. But I'm not going to find that out myself until I actually run some film through this camera. So I'll just load it with a test roll now, and I'll kind of show you how it kind of works. So here's my trusty test roll. Quite good. You just pull out the bottom section of the camera there, you put the film in, push it back in until it kind of finds its place. So now that roll is linked into the camera, and then you kind of just feed this up here into the take on reel. Make sure the line is linked to one of the kind of like the teeth, and then start winding it on. So you might be able to see now where this sprocket is underneath this bit of film here. It literally just kisses it. So just wind it on. So it's been taken up now quite nicely. So what I'll do is I'll close the lid back up. Gets caught on the casing a little bit, but there we go. And locked into position. So I'll just wind on the the dial, one complete turn. Yeah, so now that in theory is ready to fire. And then basically what you do is you just look down here, try and focus without breaking the camera. Like so. Well, let's have another go at that. Yeah, so screw back on. So that's one thing to watch out in the field if you're leaning over a particular bridge. So yeah, so while I was winding that, I didn't really see any change in the actual picture that I'm seeing. So yeah, I think it's going to be a little bit hit and miss out in the field. So anyway, so when you think you've got the focus, or when you've guessed that the focus is right for your chosen subject, all you then do is you just depress the shutter, hold it still and depress the shutter. And again, like I said earlier, it's f11 and a shutter speed of 1/125th of a second, and you can't change that, it's fixed. So I think it's going to be a case of trial and error, probably taking multiple exposures of the same scene by trying different kind of focus points, I guess, just in case this actually has an effect on the actual camera and the resultant image, or whether it's just for show. But yeah, so that's going to be a complete unknown quantity. At least the good thing with the Holga is you don't really have to worry about focusing too much. You just have to work out whether it's a portrait, whether you're shooting like a group of people, a larger group of people, or whether you're shooting a landscape, and that kind of really simplifies the focusing. Whether that actually does anything, I don't really know either, but it's a lot better than kind of just guessing with this 35mm toy camera. Yeah, so then it's just a case, like I said, of making an exposure. If you want then a multiple exposure, obviously focus on a different aspect and press the shutter again. Or if you want a kind of a new exposure, just wind on one revolution. See, that works much better than that stupid counter having my kind of 2 Tipex marks on the camera itself. And then take another image. And then in theory, you can carry on doing that for about 24 exposures. It's also got a tripod mount on the side, so you can obviously mount it on a tripod if you want to. So I might give that a go in the second roll of film if the results come out favourable. So yeah, so I feel like I've tested it enough. Let's get this test roll out and I'll put in some real film and get out there and shoot with it. The rewind procedure is quite simple. When you feel resistance with your 24 exposures, or when you feel like you've taken 24 or thereabouts exposures. I don't know what happens if you go beyond 24 exposures, like on a 36 exposure roll. So anyway, you've reached the end of the roll. All you then do is use this bottom dial here, and then you keep winding it in the direction that the knob shows. And you'll see then the top dial is winding back. And then there you go, I can feel the resistance is gone. I'm not going to wind this one all the way back because I don't need it to. But then you open the kind of the back again, and then there we go. There's the roll of film. So take that out, and there we go. So obviously I don't know anything yet about light leaks. People seem to think that light leaks do get into the camera through the kind of the viewfinder at the top, but obviously I'm just gonna run a roll through first and see how we get on. So let's load it with some film. I will close the viewfinder though, just to kind of not give it light leaks straight away. And like I said earlier as well, this camera, it says it's designed for kind of ISO 200 or ISO 400 film, and actually I've seen some people try to get away with ISO 100 film and expired ISO 100 film, and it hasn't really turned out that well. So I feel like giving it an ISO 400 fresh film is probably the best chance for this camera to kind of produce some kind of good results. So let's get cracking. So that's in, slide it up. Right, so let's shut the door. Let's see you later, film. Wind that on. Yeah, and I didn't see the counter move on at all there, so I'm definitely not going to rely on that out in the field. So yeah, so what I'll do now is obviously I will put up a montage now. I'll take some B-roll of the kind of the compositions and scenes that I'm attempting to photograph with this little toy TLR, and if the images turn out all right, I'll put them in at the appropriate places, and if not, obviously I'll talk about what I think went wrong. Yeah, so despite those results not looking the best, I do seem to be, on the whole, more successful than other attempts that I've kind of seen on YouTube using this and other similar type cameras. My method of winding on the film using the lever rather than relying on the counter seems to have worked really well as well, because I have at least 21 kind of distinct exposures on this roll of film that I was able to kind of capture. Although you could argue that I could potentially refine this kind of method to get a few more exposures, but to be honest, I'm more than happy with 21 exposures on a roll of film, because the worst thing that could happen is if you try to refine it and squeeze more onto the film, you might then end up with kind of overlapping exposures, which you don't kind of want. Yeah, so I seem to experience more issues with the first few exposures where they were more kind of tightly packed on the negatives. This seemed to kind of improve as the film kind of went on. And also what I noticed as well in the first few exposures is the wind on lever tended to kind of unwind itself sometimes, and sometimes I kind of noticed that and was able to correct it and wind it on again a little bit more, but at other times I didn't, and that probably led to more kind of tightly packed exposures at the beginning of the film. But now I'm more alive to that kind of issue. I just need to make sure in the future that I wind it on one whole revolution, and then before taking the image, just make sure that the kind of the lever position is where I expect it to be. Furthermore, I'm pleased that the shutter mechanism seems to be firing kind of correctly, at least, because when I was looking at the negatives, at least they all seem to be kind of exposed kind of correctly right to the edges, so they don't seem to be kind of clipped at all. Surprisingly as well, the images do appear to be in focus for the most part. I did in the field initially try to use these dials to obviously focus on a subject a little bit better. But to be honest, I never really saw the image alter that much, so I generally kind of left them screwed in at the kind of the tightest position, and that's probably what I'll continue to do moving forward. However, moving on to the elephant in the room, and I'll put up kind of all the negatives now, and you'll be able to clearly see that most of the negatives have been damaged by significant light leaks right across the frame. My take on why this happened is it tended to be the longer that I had the viewfinder kind of open and the camera out in the kind of the world, the worse the light leaks were. And this was certainly the case when I was down at the mill early on, when I was trying out different kind of exposures, trying the focus in, and then also trying multiple exposures as well. So for those scenarios, the viewfinder was open quite a lot of the time, and that's probably my worst images in terms of the light leaks. And then also as well, when I was in London in front of the Battersea Power Station development, I was trying to capture this kind of sculpture light show in front of me, and I was waiting for the light on this sculpture to come round and try and time it correctly to fire off the shutter. And like similarly to the mill, the viewfinder and the camera was out in the open quite a lot of the time while I was kind of playing around in that area. But then on subsequent exposures where I literally just took the camera out, and then I knew I didn't have to worry about focusing it, and then just kind of lined up my scene, got the parallax effect kind of where I wanted it, and then fired off an exposure. Where I was kind of quick, those pictures seemed to have fared the best. Yeah, so my thoughts on where the light is coming in and kind of probably squeezing around the sides of the mirror plates inside the camera tends to align with what others out in the ether think, where the kind of the light is entering this camera and damaging the film. So am I going to use this camera again? I think so. It's so easy and fun to use, as well as being kind of extremely light. And despite the light leaks, there was definitely some images there that I really quite liked. And I think with a bit of work and some tape, I might be able to kind of improve the look of the images by trying to kind of eliminate the worst of the light leaks. So there'll definitely be a follow-up to this video where I'll kind of show you like another time lapse of me trying to seal the light leaks with tape. And then I might even kind of compare the output of this camera to my Holga, because I've discovered in the box that came with my Holga that there's a 35mm film adapter that you can fit to the Holga. So it might be quite nice to do a kind of a comparison type video to compare the two kind of plastic toy cameras. Yeah, so I really hope you enjoyed this video. As always, thanks for watching. Bye for now.